Hi everybody, I'm Cameron Carey from Profit Private Training. This is a tutorial based on the exercise A Mountain Climber. We thought we'd share this with you because of the fact that this exercise is used in a lot of high volumes in exercise prescriptions nowadays. It's universally recognized as one of the go-to movements in exercise. It is a great exercise in itself. If for those of you that don't know the mountain climber, it's basically almost a long plank straight arm position on a floor where you then are generating an alternating knee tuck where you're tucking your knee beneath you. All right. So picture yourself climbing up a mountain, but you're basically on the floor. So what we're going to delve into today is the objectives behind the exercise. We're going to go into the brief anatomy surrounding it without getting too scientific on you, and then tying it all up with a couple of areas of concern that may or may not fit you as an individual. And if we are able to reach out to anyone outside of our Profit client base to possibly answer some unanswered questions, that'll be awesome. If you guys got any questions post this tutorial, please feel free to inbox us and we can chat a little bit further. Hope you enjoy it. Right, so the objectives surrounding the mountain climber, they're basically threefold. The first one is core activation. So given the position of the movement, the amount of muscle recruitment that we utilize for the mountain climber, you can activate your core unit quite effectively. Secondly, obviously it's a dramatic heart rate elevator, so that's why it's pretty much a go-to movement for a lot of exercise-based systems, because it does successfully generate a higher heart rate without necessarily having to have a huge amount of impact loaded in an upright position. Number three, it's a great mobility and flexibility based movement when done correctly. So we're going to delve a little bit more into all those aspects. So let's check it all out. Right, so regarding the core unit, let's chat about that briefly. You've basically, as the next slide will indicate, you've got the inner core unit and the outer core unit. They both serve specific purposes. We've always got them. It's all basically based on, do we use it correctly? Are all those muscles getting correctly recruited when performing and generating the movement that we're trying to do? In this case, it's a mountain climber. Let's have a look at those specific units in detail. Now, the inner core unit is key because everything is generated from the inner core to the outer unit and then onto the peripheral areas of our limbs, so namely our arms and our legs. So what is the role of our core? The role of our core essentially is to stabilize the area and the region between our rib cage and our pelvis and provide a very stable spine, okay, because everything is centered off our spine. When there's stability to the spine, we have immediately a huge amount of stability getting generated through all four limbs. Okay, in this case now, with this exercise, we're utilizing all four limbs. So is core very essential? Absolutely. So your core needs to be engaged, and you need to know how to engage it when getting into these type of exercises, right? So the inner core unit is a grouping of muscles. So you've got your pelvic floor muscles, which are basically centered deep inside the pelvis, all right? That combined with a muscle called your transverse abdominis. Now this guy, it sounds very fancy, but it's a hugely important structure because this muscle is a sheath that basically wraps around the entire midriff and it goes around the back. What it does do, it connects with the fascia of the lower back, otherwise known as the thoracicular lumbar fascia. And when the transverse abdominis contracts, it actually pulls the front and the back of the pelvis in towards each other and actually pulls on the fascia of the lower back and actually creates almost like this airbag of support, if I could describe it like that. So it's an amazing feature. So that, along with your pelvic floor muscles, and along with the diaphragm in itself, as well as a muscle, your deeper rectal muscles that run up your spine. One is specifically called the multifidus. Now, all of those grouping of muscles effectively are your inner core unit. We've got to make sure that we really have some idea as to how we work that area so it translates out into the outer core. The outer core unit. Now, this is a multitude of different muscles that come together to basically formulate the entire core structure. So you've still got that transverse abdominis that we mentioned just now, which is that airbag surrounding everything. All right, then you've got important structures, namely deep inside the pelvis, that are responsible for stabilizing our pelvis through that movement. They deep hip flexors. Some of you at Profit would pretty much know a lot of those terms that we throw around. But the psoas being a predominant one, your iliacus is the other one. Now, the other muscles actively involved in the external core unit is your rectus abdominis, which is your six-pack, your obliques, which is your side abdominals running down, as well as the higher layers of your rectors of your lower back. So you can see that all of this comes basically together to create this symphony of tension and protection to what? Our lumbar spine, and specifically the vertebral body. So we want stability throughout our entire pelvis and lower back, which is the role of the core. And again, if the core is not firing, we don't have that stability. So that is fundamentally hugely important going into any core related exercise, especially when it's body weight intended, and also when you have an extended position like a mountain climber or a plank or a bridge, because you have that suspension effect if we don't have that tension that's accurately loaded into our system. Right, now we delve right into the deep content of the tutorial. So we're going to be discussing the pelvis. The pelvis specifically obviously is engineered and stabilized through the use of our core, as well as, and that obviously is our abdominals, our pelvic flexors. So as you can see, there's a lot involved with trying to actually support our entire system under movement. So we talk about the pelvis in three different positions. You get a neutral pelvis, which is pretty much one that is stable. It's not in any high degree of rotation forward or back. Then you're going to get specifically your posterior tilt and what is known as an anterior tilt. So very simply put, let's just discuss the neutral pelvis. You'll see on the slide coming up exactly what a neutral pelvis looks like. But ideally, it's where if you had to think of your pelvis as a bowl of water, the water is not getting spilt forward nor getting spilt back. It's pretty level, and your spinal column is centered off that. Right, now we discuss the anterior rotation of the pelvis. And now this is pretty simple. A lot of us tend to have a lot of anterior rotation of the hips, where basically the front of the hips is getting driven down towards the knee, which basically means that the back section, part of our pelvis, is actually getting lifted up to our lower back, creating what? Creating quite a substantial arch in our lower back. Now, a lot of people have different shaped spines. So is an arch back a bad thing? Not at all. Some people will have a little bit more severe curvature based on the shape of their spine. But be that as it may, it's important that we have some idea as to exactly where our pelvis should be going into a movement like a mountain climber. So with this anterior rotation, the front of the hip flexors, those pelvic flexors, are inherently very tight. So they'll be pulling our pelvis forward, which means that our abdominals are not engaging well, which are ideally responsible for drawing the front of our hips up towards our ribs. Okay, giving us that little bit more neutral position, as you can see via this slide. Right, now the posterior tilt. This is obviously the movement that we basically engineer our pelvis towards. We don't want to live in a full pelvic posterior tilt. What that basically means is we're almost scooping our bum underneath us. So what does that do? That basically unloads all the pelvic flexors in the front, and we use our glutes, our butt muscles, very important, to generate that whole posterior tilt, which is really going to enable us to find that neutral position. So where is your neutral? Your neutral is somewhere between the front rotation, the back rotation, somewhere in the middle. However, in a mountain climber, the key thing to understand is that you want to really maximize your pelvis from going into as much posterior rotation as possible. So you want to squeeze your butt as hard as you can, making sure that you can engage your glutes, getting your front of your hips to drive up towards the ribs, and you get that somewhat of a rotation to the pelvis, where the pelvis is actually rotating down towards the floor. Now what happens now, not only are you engaging your glutes, you're engaging your transverse abdominis, which is ideally responsible, along with the glutes, for maintaining that posterior tilt. So you may ask, why is this all important? This pelvic rotation in my position, how is that affecting my mountain climber when I do it? Well, simply put, is that when we're unable to retain that core activation, that pelvic position which needs to be posteriorly rotated to find your active neutral position where your abdominals are engaging as well as your core. It's all one system. When we don't have that and we're generating those knees beneath us at speed or volume, we've got to be mindful of the fact that what are we actually loading then? The front of the hips will invariably start to rotate down as soon as we extend our leg back, because now that back glute isn't contracting to support that position. So our lower back ends up arching quite substantially, and it changes the whole spinal curve right up to the cervical spine. So your whole position when doing it ends up looking like this, which isn't great. So what is the look that we're after? So it's not about the look, it's about the effectiveness. So the next slide will show you invariably what type of shape you want to maintain whilst doing a mountain climber. And as you can see, the pelvis is in the right position. The spine is somewhat flexed. It's not going to be 100% straight. Okay, it's going to be somewhat flexed. The neck position also needs to be quite controlled. We don't want to hang our head below our spine. And very importantly, with regards to the arms, we want to make sure that we are actually pushing the floor away. We don't want to be sinking into our shoulders. All right, so that is key. The other element that is vitally important is that when you take the one leg back, and now this is the one thing that's very difficult to do when you're actually doing it at high velocity, is that when you take the one leg back and you draw your one knee beneath you, the leg that's extended back, in order to maintain the shape of that pelvis, you want to actually engage your glute when that leg hits the floor behind you, which is not easy to do, as you can understand, when you're going at speed. However, when you're able to start achieving a decent amount of core activation, the abdominals are actually controlling your hips, and you're getting your glutes to fire in symphony with that whole process, you can really feel the whole loaded tension being loaded into the midriff with absolutely no back strain. The shoulders are key because we don't want to collapse into the shoulders, because that's also going to affect your mid-back spinal shape and will also lend itself more to the collapsing of your back. So we get that suspended look, all right, which we don't want in your lower back. So the next slide will just indicate what type of shape you're looking to try and sustain during a mountain climber. Yes, the mountain climber is a great movement. The mountain climber should be placed into a system under the following conditions. It should be client appropriate. Namely, it also should be placed in a well-designed training system that has a very much a holistic approach. And number three, also it needs to complement other aspects of exercise. So there needs to be other elements of movement that are key to being placed inside that system. So then the mountain climber really actually works in harmony with all those other concepts. Those three key factors are very important with regards to placement and prescription. So guys, as you can see, we've gone through pretty much most of it regarding the mountain climb. I hope you found a lot of it quite interesting. There's a couple of things that you need to bear in mind. If you have discomfort in your lower back, that is a red flag. These are all the areas that need to be of a concern. If you have this pinching or popping sensation in the front of your hips when performing the mountain climber, that's a red flag as well. If you've got neck tension whilst doing the mountain climber or post, that's also another concern. If your wrists are giving you a lot of strain and you're unable to maintain a fully extended elbow, that is also going to contribute to bad form. That's something to be aware of. The aspects surrounding your core needs to all come together. So it is a body weight movement. The other primary concern that we have is when this movement is utilized as what we term a filler, when it's used to full content of a workout. So when does a training system or basically do that? Now they ultimately do that, namely to fill up time in workouts, or to ultimately increase the volume of the content within a session, or to fatigue the clients. So those three aspects are primarily used to basically use the mountain climber as an aspect to fulfill those 3 requirements. Those 3 requirements do not make up a holistic and safely executed training system that doesn't account for overloading. Now, there is a concern that we often term at Profit called structural fatigue. Now, structural fatigue is when you are doing a movement and you are exercising and you're doing that movement well, you're doing it efficiently, and everything is biomechanically in good position. However, when you get to a stage when those structures cannot sustain that movement for either be it the amount of repetitions prescribed or the time prescribed, you reach that structural fatigue where everything starts to change. Your running form starts to change when you get tired after a specific number of Ks. The same will apply to a mountain climber. So when you start to feel that you can't maintain that position like we've discussed here during the course of your movement, then stop your movement. Don't carry on with it because it's only going to create more wear and tear and possibly place you at the risk of injury, which is something that we never want to occur. Guys, that brings us to the end of our tutorial relating to the mountain climber. If you fit some of those red flags that were briefly mentioned earlier and you have questions like, how do I know whether my pelvis is weak or not? How do I know if I'm getting that tilt? I'm getting discomfort. Well, namely, discomfort in the back, discomfort in all those areas are signs. It's your body basically indicating to you that it's actually not adhering to what you're asking it to do. How do you fix that? How can you test it yourself? There's many ways of trying to analyze your own system and also actively remedy that as well. So if you want any information on that, feel free to contact us. You can either inbox us here or email us at admin@profitgym, pro-fitgym.co.za, and we will gladly help you out at any given time. Remember, knowledge is key and structural integrity is what it's all about. Happy training.